Welcome, everybody. Welcome. It's nice to have you here at the 5th anniversary of the first Charles H. Levine Memorial Lecture and Award Ceremony. It's hard to believe it's 5 years, and since the last time we saw many of you, you can see from the slideshow, the faculty, the staff, and the students have been pretty busy over the last year since the last time we met. So I thought tonight one of the things we might use as kind of a theme is that of accomplishment, of course, which has always been a feature of the Levine Memorial Night, but also talk about some anniversaries, because there are a lot of anniversaries to celebrate. The first anniversary is that this is actually the 25th anniversary of the appointment of Charlie Levine as the first SPA Distinguished Professor of Government and Public Administration. So it's a quarter century since Charlie was here, and the impact that he's had in his research, etc., is just phenomenal. So part of what we're going to do tonight is remember the contributions that he made. And actually, over the last year, Charlie has a couple of other accomplishments to his name that I'll get into a little later. It's a night to also celebrate the achievements of all our MPA students, our MPP students, our key executive program students, and our MSOD, Organizational Development Program. But it's especially important, I think, for us tonight to also focus on our PhDs and our PhD program. Because we're so proud of what our graduates over the last, over many years have done, and I think over the last few years we've contributed even more to the reputation of this program as one of the best in the country. We're going to, as is our custom, we're going to have an award later on for a PhD paper, the best PhD paper, and that's done by blind peer review. So this faculty has nothing to do with it. All right, this goes out to blind peer reviews at other universities. So we're going to talk about that a little later. But tonight, I just want to start off by recognizing 3 PhD students who have already begun to launch their career in a very nice way. They will be employed soon, which is always nice at the end of the process. Susanna Alley will become an assistant professor at Florida International University, and so I know where I can go stay in the state of Florida. Mike Hayes is going to be joining the faculty as an assistant professor at Rutgers University. And we just learned this week that Sarah Pettijohn, who's in the nonprofit field, has accepted a position at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. So I know some of those individuals are here. I wonder if I could ask you to stand up, and if I could ask the audience to give them a round of applause. We're proud of them, very proud of them, as we are of all our students. It's also the second anniversary of an important event that many of you in the MPA program and MPP program have heard about, this thing called the Volcker Commission. And it's also the 25th anniversary of the Volcker Commission. And so that's why I was so delighted that Paulette, who finished teaching a class late yesterday, trained down this morning and came and has spent the day with us and is now going to train himself back to New York because of his commitment, I think, to the memory of Charlie Levine. Charlie, as you may or may not know, was the chair of the Volcker Commission, or the National Commission on Public Service, and Paul was a senior advisor to that body of individuals. And so I was just so delighted that Paul would really go out of his way to come down here and to spend some time with our students. And so that's the 25th anniversary. There'll be more on Paul later. But there are some other anniversaries that we want to take note of. 2014 begins the year of the 80th anniversary of the School of Public Affairs. If you think about that, 80 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt made a speech and talked about the School of Public Affairs was going to be a national magnet for people, both students and also faculty. And they were going to come here and they were going to apply theory to practice and practice to theory. And so we really walk in the shadow of some giants here in terms of that 80th anniversary. It's also the 75th anniversary of something called the American Society for Public Administration. Okay, big deal, right? To most of you, what? So what? Right? I'm going to tell you why it's so what. Many of the MPA students and MPP students should be members of that association. But aside from that, this is the 75th anniversary, and our speaker from last year, Jim Perry, decided that he was going to identify the 75 most influential articles that have been published in Public Administration Review, right, since 1940. Now, who do you think had not one article in the top 75, but had 2 articles in the top 75? Charlie Levine's latest accomplishment, right, in terms of it. So what a legacy and what a model to really live up for. But that's not the end of the story, right, for American University. We have 4 faculty members who are presently on our faculty who learned this year that they'll be in Chicago and they will be featured as having one of the most influential articles. Now, each of the people I'm about to announce had one of those, right? So the people I'm going to mention, right, who are going to be recognized in this fashion are Dean Barbara Romzek for an article that she has published, David Rosenblum, our current distinguished professor, Howard McCurdy, who probably is in Seattle tonight, probably traveling, or collecting, you know, the award, the JFK award or something to that effect. And an emeritus professor by the name of Bob Cleary, which may not mean a lot to a lot of people, but Bob Cleary was a major foundational player in the development of the school and also served as interim president of the university at some point in time. So 4 on the present faculty with the most influential article. That's not real shabby, and I want to ask them to stand up, and I'd ask you to join me in a round of applause. So this is an incredible accomplishment on the part of our faculty. Oh, it gets better. Next year, or I should say in July, we will have joining us Vicki Wilkins from the University of Georgia. Her name appears on the list as well. So that's 5 faculty members at American University who can carry that title around with them, and I just think it's just a marvelous, marvelous accomplishment. There's also a 40th anniversary that we need to celebrate. And I'm not talking about the 40th anniversary of Hank Aaron with his 715th home run. Not talking about that anniversary. Right? But it was 40 years ago when a young guy from Washington State University joined American University and the School of Public Affairs. And since that time, Jim Thurber is in many ways the face of the School of Public Affairs. Not only has he produced scholarship, not only has he been an institution builder, it's also the 35th anniversary of the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies, 35 years. All right, so that young kid did pretty well while he was here, and in many ways, he is the face of the American University, along with Dean Romzek, Neil Kerwin, and others. I'd like to ask Jim to stand, and his wife Claudia is here too tonight, right? It always takes 2 to keep him under control, I'm sure. So I'd like to ask Jim to stand too and give us a chance to recognize Jim for everything he's done for the School of Public Affairs. Okay, now I was going to say it was also the 10th anniversary. As many of you know, Charlie Levine was very interested in basketball, and I was going to say, well, it's the 10th anniversary since the UConn Huskies, both the men and the women, won the national championship. But didn't you know they'd turn around and do it again, all right, a couple nights ago. So Charlie, and you're going to hear probably a little bit more about his basketball prowess, et cetera, during the evening. But I think he'd be pretty proud and must be pretty happy today about the Huskies. No offense to any Kentucky fans, SEC fans in the audience. Okay, so that's quite a sense of accomplishment in terms of American University and our faculty. It's also almost the 2nd anniversary of our new dean arriving, right? Not quite there yet, but almost there. And since Barbara Romzek has arrived, she's been engaged in really trying to position the School of Public Affairs in ways that Paul Light has written about in terms of talking about the new public service and what the mission of the school ought to be and how to go about accomplishing that. So I want to welcome Barbara Dean Romzek to the podium because she'd like to say welcome to as well.
Thank you, Bob. You missed your calling. You should have, history is your forte as well as public management. I want to say welcome to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here. I find it is an honor to be part of the School of Public Affairs. It's an honor to be here and talk about the important contribution that Charlie Levine made to the field of public administration, not just the School of Public Affairs. And the honor to pass that on to the next generation. Because what gives us lasting impact is not what we write today, but who reads it tomorrow, who gets taught it 5 years from now. And it truly is the case. The idea that Charlie wrote 2 articles that hit the top 75 over that amount of time, that's remarkable. And in fact, I'd love to know what the ratio is for the School of Public Affairs. 5 out of our faculty who are in the research publication business, that's an incredible percentage. And we'll have to do some research to figure out how many of those, but we may be up there very high in terms of the top. So that's a little bit about the School of Public Affairs. But what I really want to do is to talk a little bit about Charlie Levine and how important he was to the field, and how honored we are to have Paulette be here, and how appropriate it is to have Paul be the Charlie Levine lecturer for this week. In convening this lecture, we honor Charlie Levine for his work and for the contributions he made to the field. As Bob noted, it's a testament to his work that 25 years later, we're still talking about it, and 25 years later, we're talking about 2 of his articles having such lasting impact. We're here to build upon the record that Charlie established, to build upon the habits of inquiry that Charlie brought to bear, and to learn from his approach to public management so that we can, as scholars ourselves, promote that agenda, and as students to learn from what Charlie had to say. He set a standard for public administration that is of the highest quality. His work stood the test of time. His work was really extraordinarily insightful. For those of you in the field who've been around a while, you remember his work on cutback management. It was at a time when government was for the first time shifting from the growth model that started with the New Deal and the post-war and the 60s, war on poverty sorts of things. It was the first time government started to pull back with the Reagan era. And so Charlie worked hard to create this model of, to understand how to make smart spending cuts. And those smart spending cuts fell under the great label he had of cutback management. Now, unfortunately, we're there again. The cycle of government has gone back to the negative side. Government is again under attack. Questions about the legitimacy of government, about the adequacy of government to continue to do its important work. Those questions are now at the forefront. They're the kind of things we all in the field wrestle with. They're the kind of issues those of you who are looking for careers in public management, private sector management, nonprofit management, the sectors are all blurred now. So attacks on government are attacks on the notion of the public welfare writ large. And I don't use welfare in the sense of we're passing out food stamps, but I mean the public good in a general sense. So the issues that Charlie pursued were unfortunately timeless in that they continue to be central to our field. But Charlie wasn't just about his scholarship. He was a great teacher. He was a generous colleague. He was a giving mentor. He was very focused on working with graduate students. I knew him back at the University of Kansas. That's when he and I were colleagues together. He was very focused on his students. He brought students with him when he came to Kansas. He brought students with him when he left Kansas. He mentored junior faculty. He was a generous mentor, but he was a critical mentor. He didn't let you off the hook if it wasn't good enough. He'd tell you, it's got to be good. He'd say, the work has to be good. It's not good enough the way it is. And it wasn't a mean kind of a feedback. It wasn't, you're worthless, this is not worth my time. It wasn't said, you can do better than this. And so he set a high standard for himself, he set a high standard for his students and his junior colleagues. Now, while we were at Kansas, not just the University of Connecticut has a good basketball program, the University of Kansas is as well. And so Charlie and I used to talk basketball a lot. And what I remember most about Charlie's love of basketball is we would be watching a game in Allen Fieldhouse, and he'd be sidling over saying, I want to be one of those people picked to do the mid-court basketball shot, because he was sure he could make it. And he played enough, he probably could have made it. Now, it might have been 1 in 50 chance that he'd make it, but he had a shot at it. And he was always hoping his name would be pulled out of that lottery. Unfortunately, it never did. So the champion of public service that Charlie was, the leading scholar that he was in getting us to think about how government, even under the tightest conditions, could perform, could continue to contribute to the important issues of our day, were all part of his work across his career. But the work at the Volcker Commission really was a central focus for him in his last years, and that concentration on the Volcker Commission and the importance of the public sector was really a defining piece of his research, and that's where our connection to Paul Light comes in. Paul continues the tradition of looking at the importance of government. Paul has taken it in some ways that logic of what does government do, how should it be doing it, and what are the impacts of it. He brings that to us in his research on the current version of cutback management, which is contracting out. So the services of government still need to be provided, but now they're provided by contractors instead of public sector. And Paul has given us the concept of shadow government, which is, there's a lot of government still going on, but it's in the shadows because they're not officially public employees. And we have seen today, in the last few weeks in the headlines, how important it is that we look closely at who those government contractors are. Are they properly vetted? And not just Snowden being vetted for his credentials, but also the contractor over at the Naval Yard who, his background wasn't as carefully checked as we might like. And that's before we start talking about any of the issues about whether government contracting is actually cost savings or yields higher quality performance than government employees themselves would do. Enough of that. I'm sure Paul is going to get into that. Let me just say that I welcome Paul here. I think you all are going to learn a great deal from his conversation. He's always an insightful observer of government, and I look forward to what he has to share with the rest of us. Thank you all.
I wasn't going to bring up the Kansas City Jayhawks, because I know it's a hard year, but since you brought it up. A couple of years ago, I got a note from someone who couldn't attend the Levine Award. A person by the name of Jim Garnett, who used to teach here at American University, who's now at Rutgers, and I believe chair there. And he wrote, reflecting back on what Charlie meant to him. And let me just quote this for you. It says, Charlie was my academic mentor and more. He guided me through Maxwell's doctoral program, the dissertation process, and the early years of my career. But Charlie was more than an academic influence. He and Elaine put me up for study sessions, hauled me around during Levine house hunting, and generally made my wife Petra and me part of their lives. And we were hardly the only ones touched by the Levine family. And I think we could go back and add testament after testament in terms of the way Barbara described. Tough critic in terms, but always there and very helpful. Now our next speaker wants to say hello and welcome you on behalf of the family. He probably doesn't remember those house hunting trips at that point in time, but he's come a long way since. Jordan Levine is currently an investment analyst at the Red Cross, American Red Cross here in Washington. He received his MBA at the University of Chicago, and he received his undergraduate degree at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Again, a team we won't mention at this point. Please welcome Jordan Levine. Jordan.
I also did an MVP. But
I was worried.
no, this is incredible. The American University has honored my father this way. Fortunately, my mom couldn't be here today, but she wanted to make sure that I thanked Dean Robzak, Professor Durant, Professor Pitts, and President Neil Kerwin, and the Thurmers. And there's many more, but I'll keep it brief. So it's interesting, the world changes so much, and I think this is a special speaker tonight because really built on my father's research, and some research stands the test of time, and others, the world changes. And I actually, in 2002, before I decided to go to grad school, I read the new public service, which Paulette wrote, and it kind of, made me think, hey, maybe I do want to get a master's in public policy. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks very much. So, who do you get to introduce a distinguished professor and distinguished faculty member from another university, except our own distinguished professor, who actually was Charlie Levine's successor, right, in the chair itself. David Rosenblum doesn't have to be introduced to most of us, but I'm going to say just a couple of words about him. Many of us like to make contributions to the field and hope we can. David has helped to actually define and refine what the field is over his career. And so I remember when Bernie Ross, when he tried to recruit me, he said, I'm looking for the third person who I was responsible for recruiting Charlie Levine and David Rosenblum, and I'm hoping to find a third person who could do half as well. And I think David is certainly one of our major figures in the field. And I understand he also had a pretty good hook shot, but I've only heard that from him. So we'll have to verify that. David Rosenblum.
Thanks. It was a jump shot, and it was good. And was is the proper verb. Okay. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce Professor Paul C. Light tonight as our Levine lecturer. Professor Light has, as you've been said already, has really been among the very top people in the field for at least the last 3 decades. His contributions are all really quite stellar. He earned his PhD at the University of Michigan. I don't know how they did in the NCAA this year and followed it. But he's currently the Paulette Goddard Professor of Public Service at the Wagner School of Public Service at New York University, where he's the founding director of the Organizational Performance Initiative. Prior to that, joining NYU, he served as the Douglas Dillon Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, where he was also Vice President for Governmental Studies and the founding director of the Center for Public Service. Before that, Paul was Director of Public Policy Programs at the Pew Charitable Trust and an Associate Dean and Professor of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota's Hubert Humphrey Institute of Public Affairs. So you can see there's really quite a terrific career here, in addition to being the senior advisor, which was mentioned, to the National Commission on the Public Service of the Volcker Commission. Light is the author of 25, or at least 25 books. That's what his website says. Could be more. And at least 30 articles and book chapters. They're largely on social entrepreneurism, nonprofit sector, federal government reform, public service generally, and he's got at least one book on the baby boom, which kind of stands out on the side there. His most recent book is Government by Investigation, Presidents, Congress, and Search for Answers, 1945 to 2012. Among his award-winning books are Thickening Government, Federal Hierarchy and the Diffusion of Accountability. It's 1995, published by Brookings. That book received what is probably the highest award one can get for a book in the field of public administration. It's the Lewis Brownlow Award from the National Academy of Public Administration. And he followed that, which is really amazing, with a book called The Tides of Reform, Making Government Work, 1945 to 1995, which also received this Brownlow Award. We're talking about people who got two of the best articles in par in the last 75 years. I don't know if anybody else actually did receive 2 Lewis Brownlow Awards, but that, even if they did, that's quite a terrific achievement. And his book on government ill-executed, The Decline of the Federal Service and How to Revise It, 2008, received the American Political Science Association Herbert Simon Award. In my view, Paul is often the first out with the best work on a variety of subjects. Thickening Government is about the proliferation of political appointees in the federal government. And maybe Paul will recite some of the crazy titles that we have as we added more and more, but there are things like Deputy Under Associates, Under Secretaries, Assistant to the Department of Interior, or something like that. He's the first one who really pointed out how deep, 22 layers, some of these political appointees go. And that was a terrific contribution. As was mentioned, the new public service was right out there in front of almost everybody else, if not everybody else, in terms of the federal service's human capital crisis and competition for top talent by nonprofits among people who do want to do public service. So we are extremely fortunate to have Paul here tonight to give us our annual Levine lecture. He's going to speak on the National Commission on the Public Service at 25 years and counting. I am absolutely sure, as our dean mentioned, that this is going to be an enlightening and enjoyable talk, as all Paul's talks are, and all his books and all his articles are. One of the most creative people in the field, and as I mentioned, always out there in front. So, Paul, you're come up and give us a talk.
I've got a portable mic. It's a joy to be here and see Thurber right here. I often get a call like from NPR or the NewsHour and say, they do a pre-interview to find out whether you're any good. And then they'll call back 3 hours later and they'll say, sorry, we got Thurber. Enough already. Really. David, dear friend, and really good. I did this special issue of PAR with a couple of your faculty, because this is really a good program, Stephanie and David, and we were looking at the Federalist Papers and their relevance to what we're doing today. The founders had a pretty good sense of the kinds of issues that we'd be struggling with. I was reminded of this earlier today, that there's one of the Federalist Papers has a rather extensive conversation about the deadly adversaries of Republican government meaning the Republic. Intrigue, cabal, and corruption. And if that ain't where we sometimes sit as we look at the campaign finance system and the lobbying and all of the dealing and so forth, the polarization, we kind of like wonder whether or not the framers were kind of on top of it at an early point. But we'll get to some of that in just a second. Jordy, it's really nice to see you. You look a lot like your dad. A lot like your dad. And I don't really know where to begin. I will say that I could take a breath and give you 30 titles right now, if you want them. Secretary, Chief of Staff to the Secretary, Deputy Chief of Staff to the Secretary, Assistant Chief of Staff to the Secretary, Deputy Secretary, Associate Deputy Secretary, Chief of Staff to the Associate Deputy Secretary. Just keep going and going. Assistant Secretary, Chief of Staff to the Assistant. Chief of Staff is really one of the fastest spreading titles. It's like kudzu. It was invented in 1983 by Richard Schweiker. It's weird to go into these files and find this stuff. Schweiker wasn't really happy that his person, the person he wanted as DepSec of HHS, he couldn't get. Reagan would not give him that person because Schweiker was kind of a little iffy on questions of reproductive rights. And, you know, the White House wanted to put somebody else in the DepSec job. And so Schweiker created the Chief of Staff position and endowed it with tremendous authorities, but of course no Senate confirmation, no review. And the Chief of Staff is still the second most powerful position in the department or agency, but it's spread. You ain't nobody unless you got a Chief of Staff. And I'd like to introduce my Chief of Staff. Now, I have to say that, I mean, I knew Charlie really well, and he's a great guy. I mean, I wouldn't be here today talking about some of this if it weren't for Charlie. And I think it's okay for me to talk of him as Charlie and my friend. Charlie and I met on the basketball court at the Bethesda Sport and Racket Club. And he was a formidable player. And I mean formidable, substantial, high impact, big impact player. He was really great, a great baller, as we'd say. And he was tough. And I was working for Senator Glenn at that point in time. And let me tell you something, to those of you who are going into public policy or public administration, into academia, don't be scared of the world of practice. Get out of academia from time to time, go into the real world, and see what is relevant from your teaching and what is nonsense. I mean, I find that out all the time when I'm in the world of practice. And Charlie was really about being in the world of practice and creating social value through both his research and his practice. And he was over at the Volcker Commission doing just that, converting knowledge into impact. It's really important. And I was working for Senator Glenn at the time. I was about to go to the Humphrey Institute in Minnesota. And Charlie would come up to me and he, thought that I would be one of the water carriers for the Volcker agenda. So every time we met, he'd come and he'd say, so we've been working on this today, what do you think about it? I'm originally from South Dakota, so my language sometimes slips into casual and offending a language that I will not use tonight. But he'd say, well, what do you think about this particular provision of the Civil Service Reform Act? What do you think we should do about this one? Or what about this about prompt pay? We'd like to da-da-da-da-da-da. And I'd say, Charlie, I don't give up about it. I don't care about it. It's of no relevance to me. I don't work on it. I just don't like it. And then we'd start playing ball. And Charlie had this way of walking into me. You know how basketball players back up as they're moving in on you. So he would back up. And as I say, he was a substantial player, and he had this hook shot. He really did have a hook shot that was amazing and sharp. And as you get older and you play sports like this, you get meaner, and because you've lost your skill. So you do things like kicking, elbowing. I didn't do it, but others might have. So it really is the 25th anniversary of the first National Commission on Public Service. They met with President George H.W. Bush, who warmly embraced the report because the first President Bush really cared about the public service deeply, and he addressed the senior executive service in one of his very first encounters with the federal workforce. And Chairman Volcker, Senator Muskie, Mac Mathias, John Bradamus, who was then president of NYU. It was a collection of superstars, Fritz Mondale, who I got to know in Minnesota. just FYI for those of you in campaigns, and I worked for Senator Glenn. I wanted to see a presidential campaign in the worst way possible, and yeah, there you go. And so you're always in trouble with your candidate if you're saying, you know, he's really a lot better in person. That's a Jim Thurman quote. I didn't say. These are just like wonderful people, and President Bush welcomed their work, and most of the work was Charlie's. I did my best to pick up the stream of thinking and research that he brought to bear on that report. Now, people will say, you know, well, what impact did it have? Well, it had an enormous impact. The question being sort of what's happened since. I mean, we were able to jack up federal salaries, judicial salaries, legislative salaries, to try to address the pay compression that had existed to that point. So it's a 29.5% one-time pay increase, and then we haven't really maintained a good momentum in terms of market-sensitive pay, and there's a big debate about where the gaps are in pay. It's worthy of a dissertation as to how to calculate these things. And you know, it was all part of the kind of karma of the period to look at how government works. That's what Charlie was about. How do you make it work better? Charlie was totally motivated by social value. That's what he cared about, and that's what everybody in this room should care about, no matter what you do, is creating social value in this world. Because if it's just about getting an article in the Journal of Public Administration Research and Theory, or the APSA-R, or whatever, if that's what you're about, go study something else. Because if you're not about ultimately having your work affect the real world, Charlie would say, enough already. We've got enough of that. So make sure, I'm looking at some of you who I met with today, make sure your work is relevant to the world. And yeah, go ahead and publish wherever you want, but make sure that you engage the world of practice. Charlie really believed in that. Charlie also believed in nonlinear thinking. Charlie was a stargazer from where I sat, in the sense that he would look at a pattern of data, and he'd look for what's in it, not the linear equation that fit it. Now, that's not to say linear thinking is bad. I like ordinary least squared regression. I sleep and drink it all the time. That's all I do. OLS. They call me Mr. OLS. But curvilinear thinking and patterning analysis is also important. There's a wonderful article that I'd recommend to you called The Too Much of a Good Thing Effect, and you may be feeling already that you've had too much of a good thing. You're adrift. You know, where we see all these nostrums about what's good for policy and what's good for management of corporations and so forth. And if you do a linear equation on it, you get a modestly significant effect. It's not really good. It's not the kind of thing you write mom and dad about and say, look what I found. But if you fit a curvilinear regression to it, you see that there are these inflection points where what you thought was good becomes really not helpful at all. And Charlie was like thinking about that. He was always thinking about the unanticipated consequence as well as the anticipated consequence. What's the consequence of cutback management, for example? What's the consequence of the contract workforce? It's a good thing. We need contractors. You know, NASA built its whole history on a surge tank model where they had a lot of contractors. So they could go up and down as needed, but you can become over-reliant. There's too much of a good thing effect. You have very good contractors out there. Very good contractors out there who deliver very effective outcomes, social value for government. Do we have too many? Are some completely out of control, unsupervisable? You know, we can have a good debate about it. Have we gone too far? Have we lost capacity that should have been kept in-house? Did we cross the bright line? This is where David and the constitutional kind of conversation within public administration, very important. Have we crossed the line from what should be kept in government as a sovereign function and giving it to people who do not have the nature and incentives to behave as if this is a sovereign function? You we think about Blackwater and so forth and so on, where we contracted out sovereign functions, and we found that it's difficult. But it's not clear that the contractor alone is responsible. Maybe feds would have done the same thing, or state, local, or the nonprofits, or whatever. We just don't know. So Charlie was very much about the world of practice, very much about thinking nonlinear, kind of exploring the too much of a good thing kind of effect. And he was so totally about social value. It's a really important point for everybody. I like to do this because my kids won't let me do this. The worlds of policy, what we do, and the worlds of administration, management, how we do it, are too often completely separated by their intellectual traditions, methodologies, silos. One of the things I'm working with Chairman Volcker on right now, and I'm almost done, is this issue of integrating policy and delivery. I call it delivery. Maybe that's because I live in New York City, and I'm always calling in for delivery. So, what we call ordering in, or whatever. So Thomas Edison, Chairman Volcker was very fond of this quote. Thomas Edison once said that vision without execution is hallucination. Write it down. And the real quote should have been, vision without execution is hallucination, comma, and vice versa. There is no administration of value without vision that leads it. Why do we exist? Why do we have a department of X or an agency of Y or whatever? I mean, what is the vision that we carry forward? What is our belief as public servants, or engaged in the world of social impact? What is our vision? What are we being asked to do? Because if we're just existing there to occupy a chair or a space, then we ought not be there. If you don't have a purpose, a vision, if you have nothing to do but exist, perpetuate, then, we have better things to spend our money on. But if you have a vision, and this is like so much the stylization of how we do legislative drafting today, you have a grand vision molded through thoughtful, systematic analysis. Beautiful. It's a thing of beauty, like a crystal vase that has been forged through careful, thoughtful analysis. It can't be executed. What you got? You got nothing. So if you cannot put these two together and say, what about that food regulation? Can we deliver it? What about that health care program? Can we sell it? Can we get it? Parenthetically, giving responsibility for implementation of a program like that to arguably the least liked agency in the world may raise questions about the vision and execution question. I'm just saying to y'all, you've got something very useful here at American. I've seen it in 3 or 4 other schools. I've done a lot of traveling over the last year visiting schools. There's always the potential here to bring these two positions together at the intersection, informed by politics, informed by the political system, because we're in a political system, and informed by constitutional theories and so forth. Good methodologies, good concepts, flexibility, the nonlinear thinking, the practical barriers that we face. If we can do that, we're in a new field. It's a field of policy design, architecture and engineering, and thoughtful art of conceptualization, of integration, so that when the policymaker starts with the question, what do I want to do to regulate these markets which have fallen out of control and are collapsing? What can we do, Senator Dodd, Representative Frank? There's somebody always by the side who says, and how are we going to do it? Can we really deliver new financial regulation in a setting where we have 6 different agencies with incentives to regulate. How are we going to do that? Should we merge? Should we rebuild? What happened at the Securities and Exchange Commission? Anyway, why did they miss this? What happened? Why did we deregulate? Didn't we know this was going to happen? What's going on? And if you're not thinking about both at the same time, you are hallucinating. So the two have to come together, and it has to be in a cauldron of politics, of theory, sovereignty, the basic purpose of it all gilded. See, cauldron, gilded. All gilded by a concern for social value. That's what it's about. That's what your father was about. He wasn't doing that for fun. Let me tell you, it wasn't fun. President Bradamus of NYU, who I really do love, gave me comments on my draft, and he had given it to the English department at NYU to edit. I like to take a review process, you know, so it's like, oh my gosh. And they changed, every time I used the word though, it was changed to although. And if you look at my current writing, I've never used the word though again. Even though I've been tempted. Though there have been many instances where I would have liked to, I cannot use it. And then when we had our final meeting, President Bradamus said, I have some comments for Paul, and I want to start with the word though. I was like, enough already. I mean, I've seen it. I've been there. So look, you know, I often am in audiences with students and nonprofit people and so forth. I don't care what you do. I don't care anymore. If you're not about social value, get out. I say that to civil servants, get out. If you're here for the job security and the benefits and the vacation time and the health care, I get it, I understand it, get out. And I say that to the nonprofit people, I say that to the private people, I say it to everybody, because everybody needs to be motivated by social value, and that's what Charlie was about. That's what he cared about. He understood the purpose of the enterprise was not the grand policy that you can lay on your shelf because you were published in the right journal. It's not the perfect machine, orderly and efficient. It's what comes out at the end. You know what I'm talking about. I know, see, right there, I'm looking right at you. You know what I'm talking about. If you're not here for the social value, you're in the wrong program. But I know you are here for the social value, or you were coerced by a professor who said something like, you're going to have a takeaway question at the end of this lecture. I mean, there's more coercion in this room than in a lockdown, I'm afraid. But hopefully I have just a couple of things more that might be useful. Now, I would say that Charlie's work and my work that followed, because I really wasn't in the conversation about public administration before. That was kind of there at the National Academy of Public Administration when I first met Charlie. But, you know, I'm a policy guy. Really. But then I got into this public administration stuff, and you know, Charlie was very helpful on that. You know, I kept moving along, and you know, there were 5 different things that kind of emerged from my work with Charlie, and as a product of being introduced into this discipline by people like David. I mean, I read his stuff quite frequently, and he produces a lot, which is hard to keep up with. Slow down, boy. You know, I mean, really stop. You know, he's just constantly writing. But let me just give you the 5 things. Number 1, and this comes from the Federalist. I'm a Hamiltonian, I admit it. Hamilton wrote in the Federalist Papers that government should be engaged in extensive and arduous enterprise for the public benefit. He didn't say trivial and easy for the private benefit, by the way. He used the term extensive and arduous for the public benefit. And that's something we keep in our mind. We're not in this room about trivial stuff. This is not what motivates us to be engaged in the pursuit of policy and the designs that might make them policies possible and effective. We're in the business of generating social value, arduous, extensive. I mean, we should be working where it's tough. We got to be working where it's tough. The second thing that I've learned over the years, and we talked a lot about, is that we need to be, we need to have a clear understanding of who's responsible for what. That takes us into the nebulous world of contracting. We should have clarity of command. We should have clarity of accountability. We should know what the consequence is for our actions, right? So, we've done a study, I've done a study of 37 breakdowns by government over the last 14 years. You know them all, you know what they are. We talk about them all the time. There were a couple of mentions of it, Secret Service conduct in Cartagena. Very interesting. The public was watching that story. These 37 events actually got enough news coverage to capture public interest. You have the big ones, Hurricane Katrina, the Gulf oil spill. Government didn't cause these things. Mother Nature caused Katrina. Bad mood that day, I don't know, but it was a bad thing. We didn't cause that, and terrorists committed the atrocities on 9/11. But did government participate or contribute to? And the answer is to some extent. In many of these breakdowns, we see the lack of government engagement or problems in resourcing or problems in policy. And in fact, through our coding of these 37 events, we can only find one of the 37 where there wasn't both a policy and administrative delivery problem. And that was the Haditha massacre, as it's sometimes referred to, the killings of 24 unarmed Iraqi civilians after a roadside bomb went off in Haditha. And U.S. Marines just lost control. Now, I didn't find a policy error in there unless you really want to dig back and say, what were those Marines doing in Haditha? And if we had made a different policy decisions, they never would have been there. There never would have been a roadside bomb, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't want to get too deep into that ideology, but this notion of the chain of command and the chain of accountability is very important to understand in the sense that we have to be held accountable for our actions. And that's important. And I think sometimes we've lost that. And in this particular moment in history, when you say to the federal bureaucracy, how could you possibly have made a mistake like that? And the chairman of a significant House investigating committee drags people up for yet another perp walk, as we would call it, showing to the cameras that we found the wrongdoer. We might say, well, what did the board do? Congress, to create this situation. The third thing is to remember that all public service positions, wherever they might be, are posts of honor. That at the end of the day, it's posts of honor. At the very top of government with our appointees, at the top of our nonprofits, our funders, and so forth. When I said I don't care where you go, what I mean is I don't care where you go, it's what you know. And those of you who are younger and going to start circling through the sectors, what we know about public service is that today's public service is that you're going to go many different places. Some of you are going to go private. It's okay. Some of your professors will say, oh, I wish she had gone to government. That's the proper place for a student of a public policy and administration program, government. Well, I don't care. If you want to go private and you're going to produce social value, if you want to go nonprofit, you're going to produce social value. If you want to go to government, you're going to produce social value. I don't care where you go, it's what you know. And those of you who are in this program should insist that you know the right things so that you can rotate and move, because you're going to move. Among the young people in this room, I'm guessing that on average, well, actually not on average, the vast majority of you think that staying in a job for more than 5 years is a really bad idea. Am I right? That didn't used to be the way. It used to be that you thought that staying for 30 years would be just about wrong. That's how my father thought, you know. So, and of course, I followed the idea that staying in a job more than 2 or 3 years, maybe less, is a really good idea. When you went through my bio, I was like, God, that guy can't hold a job. What's going on with that? So what you're doing is really important no matter where you go. And you've got to always keep within you that deep commitment to the social good, the public value, the public good, what you want to call it. So I don't care where you go, and I know you have no debt. You didn't take out any loans for this, did you? Really? Seriously? That's the best thing the baby boomers could do for you, is to forgive your debt and then get out of the way so you can get a job, but we're not going to do that. I was saying earlier today that I won't even ride on an elevator anymore with millennials. I just won't do it. Because they're so angry that we're not getting out of the way so they can get jobs. Good luck. I mean, we're not going anywhere. We're hanging on with our fingernails. My standard notion about this is that we are always encouraged by the Grammys, because every year a baby boomer wins something, you know. And like, now, most of the baby boomers who are winning Grammys of late are already gone. Warren Zevon, gone. George Harrison won a couple of years ago, and he's been gone for a while. But we like to say when we see that a baby boomer wins and we still rock. We still rock. You want me to start dancing a little bit? Well, actually, I can't. So keep that notion of the post of honor that you will hold wherever it is. Be the conscience in your organization. It's okay to blow the whistle. Be careful about it. Because there's always going to be pushback. When you challenge the conventional wisdom, do you think the conventional wisdom retreats in awe? Your grand inspired policy or idea for further implementation? Oh, please, thank you for showing up and telling us how we're wrong and how we could do things better. Do you think the prevailing wisdom, the conventional wisdom says, oh, we're so wrong, we were so wrong, thank you for pointing that out? Those of you who are leading a career of public service, you are challenging prevailing wisdom in many cases. You've got to be ready. You've got to call on that sense of honor that Charlie represented for inspiration and endurance. I think, you know, I'm going to wrap up rather than go much deeper into this. I don't want to talk about contracting. The 7.5 million people who work for the federal government under contracts today, and how they work and how we manage them. I don't think I'm going to talk about that. And I don't want to talk about campaign spending, because I don't know what to say about it. I asked Thurber, and Thurber says, tune in when I'm on the news hour. No, I did a pre-interview for the news hour a couple of weeks ago, and they never called back. And I was very hurt by that. And then they did call back and they said, well, we've decided to kill the story. I was like, well, that's okay with me. And then I turn on the news hour and there's the story. What's that about? Just tell me the truth, you know, so I can be better. But please don't hide the truth either. So, you know, when I think about what we're about in this room and what Charlie was about, gosh, I miss him. He touched so many of us in important ways. When I think about everybody in this room, you know, we're the people who are brought to this by the desire to make this world just a little bit better. Not all of us agree on which way to turn in that regard. Some of you come from a different perspective than the others. And we have to be engaged in honest, candid debate. We can disagree with each other. You know what? Sometimes it's worth a really good fight. I mean, not with weapons, you know, not with fisticuffs, but a really good fight over something you really believe in, but to understand that this is a system that we're in that we also need to honor at all turns. And just realize that we're together in this. And if we can't draw inspiration from each other as we confront the conventional wisdom and say, this isn't right what I see, and I care about it, and I'm going to act about it. I see, I care, I do. And we need to rely on the strength that resides in each one of us. And when I got ready for this, I realized, how much this conversation and being here to represent Charlie, who has affected me quite dramatically in my own work over the years, it's just really nice to have him around. And he's around. I mean, can't you feel him in this room? Can't you? Because Charlie's with us. And he's in your commitment to public service. That's what he was about. That's what I'm about. And that's what you're about. And if you're not about it, get out. Okay? All my love and appreciation to Charlie. And my respect and thanks to each one of you. That's what I got to say. Maybe we have a question? Yeah.
Get out without some questions. So we've got some time for a few questions.
Jordy.
Jordy.
Thank you. I guess my question is, when you say get out, when someone's not interested in creating social value, but they're entrenched and it's better than their best alternative, do you have any tactics or strategies to deal with that situation?
Well, they're occupying space that could be occupied by somebody who's really committed and gives that extra percent. I've had this argument with people in nonprofit land who say, well, it doesn't matter whether our accounting office really cares about the mission of this agency. Why should they? They're just accountants. And I'm like, yeah, but those are people who are committing to the overall and contributing to the overall performance of this organization. And if you don't give them an invitation to care, you're losing this productivity, this extra energy. And if they're not committed to it, then go out and get somebody who is, because they'll give you that extra oomph. But I did have a conversation at a speech with somebody who said, our executive director is just terrible. She's just terrible. She's killing our organization. She doesn't care about the mission. She's been there forever. She doesn't want to leave. And I said, well, what's your job there? I mean, what do you do there? And she said, well, I'm the chairman of the board. And I was like, oh, I see, wait a second. It's a no-brainer, she's got to go. And so I said that on the record. I said, fire her, as I was just so upset, she had the power. So, look, I think there are a tremendous number of people who are committed to social change. Different sides of the aisle, for sure, lots of disagreement. If you're not interested in that and you're in the public service broadly defined, make way for somebody who's ready to do it. That's all I'm saying. There are lots of things that are wonderful to do in this world. And if you're there, if you're there for the security of the benefits of vacation time, that's okay, but that can't be your primary. That's a good thing to have, but if you're a federal worker and you've gone through the last 3 years and you're saying, gee, it's fun to go into work today, then something you're not paying attention. It's tough, but you're committed. You're committed to creating social value. So there's a saying in New York that you pick up over time, which is, I'm just saying. If you're not committed, get out. Just saying. Just saying. Yeah.
Sort of backing up on that question is, if someone who is an accountant, well, they have that intrinsic value, how do you connect them to the mission? Are there examples that can be found?
Yeah, I do a lot of work with the arts. I do a lot of work with food, the food industry, as we sometimes call it, food insecurity. And we were talking at lunch today about the rise of these terms that make it more palatable to talk about things like hunger, like food insecurity. You're insecure, greater insecurity, or extreme poverty. Those kinds of things. And we can get rid of extreme poverty, but what happens when we're done with that? You move people above $1.25 per day to $1.30. Now what do you got? Poverty. How do you do that? How do you define these issues? So your question was again?
Well, so it's talking about the accounting.
Yeah. So let's take like.
Oh, sorry.
Oh no, I'll give you an example. I worked with an organization that delivers, that is a food rescue operation. Really good organization. And their back office people, as they're sometimes called, go out on the trucks regularly to deliver food as part of their job, so that they can see the interface between what they do and what the organization delivers. It's the worst thing you could do to put people who are engaged in quote-unquote non-policy activities. They're not on the front lines. They're support staff, or they're back office. They're the hidden workforce. To not invite them to come to the opera after they've helped you cover the cost by fundraising or accounting for the production or whatever, they don't get to come. You don't invite them to the gala. You don't do anything for them. They can't even go to the opera. They're not asked to ride the trucks. They're not given a stake. I mean, it's impoverishing your organization, and it creates this dividing line between the people who are creating the policy or the goal and the people who are delivering it, and they're somehow set aside. And they have so much to contribute. They can tell you, you know what, this truck would run better if you took a different route rather than going down to Lansing, which everybody knows is Potholeville. Go this direction or that. You know what I'm talking about. This guy is more New York than anybody. I mean, he's perfect for New York. I love him. You're not looking so bad yourself in that black suit. You can pull it off. People shout out to me on the streets in Soho. Really? Is that jacket back in? Really? The fat tie? Really? They'll call you out. But look, you got to give people a stake, because they should be there and want to be there in most cases to make a difference. They care. They're going to lose their jobs too. So I say bring them in to the conversation. Have them talk to you when you're starting to design a new production of Mice and Men with Jim Neighbors in it. That might not be a really big selling program. I don't know. You know what I'm talking about. You need all the energy you can in that room. That's what you need. And we know from the research on entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship that lone wolves often accomplish great things. And there may be a lot of lone wolves in this room. Academics are sometimes lone wolf types, But what we know from studies of patents and trademarks and so forth is that teams do better than lone wolves. Now, that doesn't mean that the lone wolf heroic entrepreneur doesn't break through every once in a while. But you've seen that commercial about the garages, right? Well, this is the garage where Amazon was invented. And this is the garage where Steve Jobs came up with the computer or whatever. So, borrowed the computer that IBM made that was borrowed from the computer. Anyway, I won't go too deep in that. But you know what? I mean, teams develop stuff all the time as well. And they actually do a better job of preventing mistakes. It's really an interesting phenomenon. They have shorter tails of failure. It's just very interesting. And so we want both. But give the people in your organization a piece of the action and you'll see something happen. Some will say, I just don't want to be part of that, and you've done some winnowing. And others will say, this really gives me a reason to stay that extra hour. Whatever. So, other questions?
We've got time for one more question, and then Paul's going to be around if you want to grab him later.
There's a lot of discussion lately about major changes Partnership for Public Service just released a
Yeah,
big,
so,
sort of framework. And what I was wondering is, given the divide between parties over the role of government, given the divide between management and unions within government, do you think it will take sort of one big effort, one comprehensive thing, or are there a couple of low-hanging fruit that you believe could be done in the interim that could, make a significant impact on the government?
this is a really great question, because we were looking for just that intervention in this little project that did on the 37 breakdowns. So the coding was really quite deep in terms of what had gone wrong. What could we have done better? You can flip this into like, where did we fail, or where could we have succeeded? You can do it either way. So we looked and looked and looked, and as I said, the only pattern we found was no pattern. There's no one thing. Now this is going to be controversial, I suppose, and I'm not want to say things that are controversial or off the top of my head. There is no one thing. There is no low-hanging fruit. It is not the civil service system. It is not performance measurement and management. It is not a faster hiring process. It is not fewer political appointees. It is not congressional committee reorganization, although that would be a good thing. And that might be where you can start, because that's where all salmon swim from. If you remember Obama's reference to salmon being regulated by 16 different agencies. It's not one thing. I mean, we have left this government without significant reform for 70 years. And I'm not even saying that the Hoover Commission was that significant. But it's time to take a look at how the parts work together. I read the partnerships report on civil service reform. It's very good. There's a lot in there worth paying attention to. It's worth reading. But I'm telling you, we looked for a silver bullet. We were looking for any kind of leverage point, and the answer is that it's everything, and we need to take a look in a systematic fashion with the policy people sitting together with the delivery people and talking about what the heck is going on and what we need to do. Is it a resourcing problem? Yes. Are there ethical problems? Yes. I mean, you end up like feeling like, holy moly. How are we going to fix this? We got to get a group of people sitting around the table and saying, okay, what kind of government do we want? And that's really a hard thing to do. Now, I'll give you just one last thing. If I were to tell you, as I might, that there's maybe $1.5 trillion to be netted out in doing something like that, might you be more interested? I don't know. It's only $1.5 trillion, and why not cut Social Security? Or why not repeal Obamacare? I mean, we could save just as much. I mean, we got to figure out how to do this. And I think that calls for some systematic work. And is it the civil service? Well, I've had this debate with Max Steyer. I love him. He's a great guy. I really do like him a lot. And he says we need a faster hiring process. And this is really a snarky thing to say, that if you accelerate the hiring process so that it's faster, that just means that new recruits will encounter the deadening effect of the bureaucracy sooner. And then people start going, my gosh, we really want to invite him to our holiday party. Anyway, you get my drift. I mean, I don't know where to begin anymore. I used to have lots of ideas. But it's a very complicated situation we've gotten ourselves into. And it's time for a really good look. And to wrap this all up in a big bow, if we had Charlie here, he'd say that too. He'd say it's time to back up into the problem and swing everything we've got at it and figure out what we can do to make this thing work a little bit better. And it ain't going to be in cutting the contract workforce. It ain't going to be, you get my point. I was looking for that, and I'm looking at these tables, and I'm saying, I need help here. And I think it's in this room. I think it's in the research by these fine faculty members and these future faculty members. I'm impressed with you guys. You know. So anyway, that's all I got to say. Thanks, Jordy. You know.
I'm just looking at the clock, and we have the wrong time on the clock. Nonetheless, it's a small token of our esteem. And don't go by it if you're trying to get a train tomorrow morning. Okay, but thank you so much.
Oh, I'll
for
put
coming.
this. I'll put this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Well, our PhD students have been sitting very patiently, and they're very anxious to hear who the award winner is. You've heard a lot tonight about mentoring, and our associate chair of our department, Allison Jacknowitz, has probably done more mentoring and more advising over the past 6 or 7 years than most of us in the room. So who better to give the award tonight to our PhD recipient, Allison.
So before announcing this award, I'd like to thank Professor Edmund Stasic, who organized the nomination process and also the reviewer panel. So not only does this event honor the life and achievements of Charles H. Levine and our distinguished colleague, Paulette, but each year the Levine family and the Department of Public Administration and Policy also acknowledge the achievements of one of our doctoral students through the Charles H. Levine Doctoral Student Award. The award is intended to recognize a doctoral student who has written a manuscript that is likely to make a strong contribution to the literature in public administration and policy. The awardee is determined by a panel of faculty reviewers from outside of American University. This year's reviewers included Heather Geetha Taylor from University of Kansas, Sanjay Pandey from Rutgers Newark, and Jody Stanford from the University of Minnesota. The reviewers were tremendously impressed with all of the papers they examined and noted that we clearly have talented students who are a credit to the department and the memory of Charles Levine. However, the contributions of one student in particular stood out. Of this student's paper, the panel had the following 3 things to say. It is a paper that is very well written, with a strong but measured analytical orientation. The author's paper demonstrates an impressive understanding of the policy context considered, as well as a robust application of relevant theoretical lenses. The paper offers well-developed hypotheses and provides a test of these hypotheses with a novel empirical approach. Most notably, the panel applauded the awardee for carefully and systematically examining how a wide range of factors influence and drive policy adoption and implementation. The panel has also encouraged our awardee to immediately submit his paper to a peer-reviewed journal, which is perhaps the highest praise possible. On that note, please join me in congratulating Chris Birdsall, recipient of this year's titled Understanding Policy Adoption and Innovation in Performance Management Context, the Case of State-Level Performance-Based Funding Policies for Higher Education. Congratulations, Chris.
Right, well, thanks very much. A few people before we break up tonight I hope you can all stay for our reception. That smell is killing me already in terms of smelling some of that food. I want to thank Eden Waller, who's been just essential to putting this program together. I want to thank again Ed Stasic, who really put together so much of the peer-reviewed outside peer review and who really set up many of the meetings today. He's at a conference. I want to thank Dave DeFusco, who did just a stellar job in terms of public relations and in terms of advertising. Dean Romzik, I'll always thank the Dean, but she really was critical in supporting this event tonight. And Last of all, but not least, Dave Barata, who's been at this for 5 years and who is constantly worrying what was going wrong tonight because you were all here and everything seemed to be working right. A year from now, hopefully, or about a year and a half from now, David has been doing all this while he's gone full-time to law school and maintained an A average. So a round of applause for all those people. But mostly, thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of the evening, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Well, not those of you who graduate. We don't want to.